Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Michael. So, Michael, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Thanks for having me. So I normally live in the UK, as we were just sort of discussing in prelude before. I'm in Georgia, in Tbilisi for the next 7 weeks, and I am a fractional project manager.
So, can you just tell us more about fractional project management, like what exactly that means and kind of how you got into that in the first place?
Is it worth exploring fractional as a general concept, or are
Just
your
fractional project management, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. So fractional project management, I guess, I know I said I wasn't going to do fractional, but it's obviously like a strategic kind of thing, and it hadn't really trickled down to project management. So I have a couple of things in mind when I say fractional project management. In one respect, if it's at a strategic level, so someone who can come in short term, a couple of days a week, be embedded in the company and be setting up like a PMO or setting up sort of the processes and optimizations and efficiencies sort of in the background. That's kind of like, I guess, the classic sense of fractional, using that strategic angle. And then I've been coining a new term, which I call sort of fractionally freelance. So it's working as a freelancer, so more traditionally task doer based rather than anything strategic, but on a fractional basis, which sounds wishy-washy, but it's the idea that, before COVID, before remote work kind of really took off, the only concept of freelancing and contract work in say project management would have always been a 5-day-a-week job for 3 months. And even when we went to remote, it still very consistently was someone thought that you always had to have a full-time project manager. And now there's more and more companies adopting the practice where you can have someone spinning a few plates, running 5 projects, but just sort of being around rather than constantly, in the office for 5 days.
Awesome. So I'm curious kind of how you got into this field in general and project management. Like, what's your background or what made you kind of want to get into this field?
So I think it was like really early on, like even in my teenage life, I started putting on events and stuff. I guess it's the way of being near creatives when you're not creative yourself. So I used to run events and stuff, and then I always get in trouble when I say this, but as I grew up, I ended up transitioning into project management in my way of thinking. It's like the adult version of event management, and that sounds really, people will come at me for that, and I don't mean it. I just mean that a lot of the events that I was doing, they were the type of events where you still got to be up till 5 a.m. I wanted to run festivals and stuff. And so even as an adult, there are plenty of respectable adults obviously doing that lifestyle, but it just became, I guess the lifestyle as a whole was just something I couldn't keep up long term. And so I kind of went to the office-based version of that in my head, which is like project management, because it's still logistical challenges. It's still that same kind of brain if you're an event manager or a project manager. And so I segued, I guess, into that quite organically.
So in terms of managing projects, obviously there's always different types of projects, different verticals you can work in, and different experiences. I guess in terms of what you focus on, there's certain industries or verticals or types of projects that you've kind of worked on more over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I went to university down in Brighton in the UK, which is, I know the reason. I was going to say it's got a huge e-learning industry just randomly in Brighton, and it's mostly because one company about 30 years ago set up a company, merged with another company, and then almost every big agency in the UK, not necessarily everyone, but most of the big ones have all spawned off the back of this one company. People, working there 5 years, setting their own one up. And so inevitably, because they were set up in Brighton, there was just lots of other ones. So like if you go to university down in Brighton, there's so many people that end up just in e-learning because it's the place to be. I did that for quite a while, and then I'm sort of using that, it's kind of like a creative agency by another name. So people think of e-learning as this foreign thing, but the reality is it's developers, graphic designers. They just happen to be specializing in e-learning. So off the back of that, I've worked in other creative agencies and marketing companies. And then more recently, I've been working with some AI sort of technical companies because I do have like an agile qualification. I was always seen in most of the creative agencies I was in as the technical, non-technical PM. And so I have like that kind of background as well. And I've slowly started transitioning into that.
So in terms of, working on like the more technical side, obviously when it comes to software development, many companies today are kind of outsourcing, offshoring, whatever you want to call it, right? So you have kind of developers all around the world. So has that kind of been, like a big focus for you working with some of those teams? Or are you kind of working more with like in-house developers? What does that process look like for you?
It's mostly been I've been coming onto steady ships in-house, and so because I guess they've also been outsourcing to, like you were saying. So there's lots of people basically who end up working for one company, and none of us actually work for that one company. And project management, compared to a lot of the other rules, even if you're outside of the company, particularly in the fractional sense of the word, I'm trying to be a lot more embedded in their processes and who they are, and trying to be their cultural fit. So even if I'm outside the company, from I guess all of the developers' point of views, I'm inside. Like they would consider me to not be quite their manager, but to be within that level of things. And so I'm the one keeping things together, I guess, because there is that notion that I think in the next like 10 years, everyone's going to go fractional. But then if everyone literally goes fractional, like how do you keep the company as an actual thing rather than just a bunch of random people?
So how do you kind of balance that? Obviously, fractional is one thing, but also it's like with technology, you have AI tools or AI sort of, people that are helping with certain things, whether it is project management or software development, where you have like an AI, replica. So where do you see that, coming in? Do you still feel like the human touch is important, or do you think the AI soon will be able to do all these things for us?
You mean specific to like project management, basically being able to do my
Yes.
job?
Yeah.
I think that's a huge misdirection of like what project management is, which is an interesting thing. So I even like a decade ago, I used to have like my mantra was like people, not process, because there's a really easy, logical way to think of project management as a bunch of Excel sheets and data and reporting and things, which AI can 100% do. But a huge amount of the work is actually the psychology, the stakeholder buy-in, getting people to do what you actually need them to do, getting prioritized above other people, the coaching, the support. So much of it is almost being a counselor to people. And so like the empathy is a huge part of being a project manager. So I think we're safe. I mean, there's an argument in maybe not the next 10 years where I think that's where you're talking, but maybe the next 20 years, then, there's a step that at that point you're talking about everyone's job not being safe, because the empathy I was just talking about, if my empathy is to get a developer to do something, but the AI is already the developer. So there is an argument, or a strong argument, that the psychology that I'm referring to, even if that is a useful thing of PMing now, that might literally in 15, 20 years maybe not exist anywhere. And so then my job is no safer than anyone's, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of hard to predict that, but it's just an interesting, thing to kind of keep in mind. And I guess in terms of what you focus on, obviously, you're based in like in the UK, usually. So are you kind of more working in the UK and European market, or do you also have clients here in the US? What does that kind of look like for you?
I think like remote working is like, and global, like helps you to be completely like a global person. So I mean, to be honest, I actually target the US market as much as I can. So I've worked for one client for like the last 6 months. I think I'm going to get a 3-month extension, sort of put that in today, and just fully transparently want American clients because the UK pays quite terribly. Is the really transparent version of that. Like the comparative salaries, full time or freelance or fractional, whatever, like everywhere in the US is significantly higher. So you can actually price yourself really competitively and still get a much better day rate than you could in the UK. Obviously, there's like some issue of working async out of office hours and stuff, but I mean, my normal sort of the UK's 2 p.m. is East Coast 9 a.m. I think off the top of my head. So particularly East Coast, it's quite easy to work with. It's not too bad working async. Obviously West Coast, if that's going to become like 4 or 5 p.m., you might almost miss each other the entire day. So it kind of depends on the role that you're doing, because if it is just process behind the scenes, then that doesn't really matter at all. If it's much more like I need stakeholder management and need to be involved with people on a day-to-day basis, then yeah, it just doesn't work as well. So you got to find the right client clients, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And then in terms of your focus, right? Obviously, we just started, Q2 here of 2025. So, what are some of your biggest goals and objectives for the rest of this year?
So separate to my gold project management sort of thing, we launched a community space called like the Fractional Hub 6 weeks ago. We've got 400 people in the community so far, but we've got like a paid and a free area. We've got a course. So most of my focus at the moment is kind of going into that and trying to grow it, which is in of itself like another. It's like having a third. I have 2 clients and I have the Fractional Hub, and being a huge thing balancing those 2 things. And so I guess really trying to launch that, becoming like a huge player in the fractional space, because I'm utterly convinced over the next decade fractional will be everything. Touching upon the AI sort of aspect that we were talking about before, every month there is less and less of a reason for people to be working full time in one company. Every single month you're having an AI bot be able to do part of someone's job. And so even if we talk about it not necessarily replacing everyone, there's definitely an argument to say, well, it's definitely making you way more efficient. And if you're more efficient than you were the year before, like, why are you still doing 5 days of work? And I just feel like eventually the shift is going to just have to start snowballing. And so we've got this community space trying to get people to like inducted into like how to do it, how to position yourself online, but then like a support network and all of that kind of thing. And then we bring on guest speakers who've been there, done it, or tax advice specifically for fractionals, or how to price yourself with clients, HR professionals kind of helping us with that and things like that. And so that's 90% of my focus. And the other one is just the fairly generic. My project management's going quite well. I'd like it to keep going well, grow it. I have a couple subcontractors that work within gold project management, and I'd like that to keep growing.
For sure. And in terms of the fractional hub, like, are you like seeing most of the people in your community so far are also in the UK, or are they kind of also just spread out between like the US and other markets?
I think spread out. We've got a decent mix of some US people in there, and I think it's telling that the UK ones feel like at least most of them are early on in their journey, so they're more likely potentially to take our course, just sort of sussing it, trying to think what is this space. And where we've got some other people who have been like fractional CFOs, fractional CPOs for like the last 4 years, because I think if you look at like all of the trending graphs and everything, this has been like a thing in America for about 5 years. I mean, there are people who tell me they've done it for like 15 years, but in terms of like at least the terminology and the word existing, it feels like 5-6 years in the US. It's really started to sort of explode. And in the UK, there's literally a Google search trending thing that we have an image of somewhere in our course. I think it's about July 2024, maybe April 2024. You just see it no one's ever in the UK ever searched the word fractional. And then like at April or something, it like spikes. So we are literally 12 months as a country, or as a group of countries, into that space. And so even now, a year in, 2025, I think if I did another search, I'd see like an even bigger spike, because I've been posting about it now for like 9-10 months quite consistently. But in the last 2-3 months, it feels like all I see on my LinkedIn now is like fractional.
That's awesome. So if you could go back in time to before you got started in your fractional career, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
I guess that so much of it, at least right now, I can't predict the future, but right now, so much of it is based off of your like a LinkedIn personal brand profile. It sounds so generic. It feels like the type of thing that everyone's told me for like a decade and I ignored. But then having actually entered the fractional space, it feels so much more like a partnership and like a strategic partnership with the client, rather than like any kind of employee-employer relationship, which is where I think it differs from freelancing. Because I think so many people freelance, but the reality of, if you actually looked at the contracts they had, they're just employees by like another name. They're not really like owning a business. They're not really, they're doing 9 to 5. They're listening to the client, tells them where to go, they do it. So fractional is much more of that strategic partnership. And I think because of that, I haven't shown my CV in like 14 months. Like the idea of having a paper CV, that doesn't seem to exist anymore. And so much of it is like the thought leadership, the posting on LinkedIn, the conversations I have that ultimately lead to DMs. I jump on calls with people like nonstop. I'm always networking, but it's very much like hey, you seem like a cool guy, kind of like, you're hired. Like, it's not like, oh, show me your credentials, we need 10 references and 4 rounds of interviews. And that's just off the back of like 10 months or 12 months of like consistently posting. I've got 5,500 followers. I think you have like 15, 18,000 or something. I just think if I had started a decade ago, it just feels like my network would now be on like 100,000 people. I'd be seen very publicly as the guy. So if I pivoted into fractional at that moment, it feels like it would have gone even bigger. And so, yeah, it's never too late to start.
That's good advice. If somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you, either join the Fractional Hub or wanted to use your services, do you mind sharing your website or social media? I guess best ways to get in contact.
Yeah. So I'm LinkedIn, and my / is it's literally just called Fractional Michael Gold now. And then www.thefractionalhub.com. Probably the two best places. I mean, you could also go to goldprojectmanagement.com, but I'm not expecting many people via this to need that.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thanks so much for your time today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.